All right, so we are getting into chapter 2, which is PC technician responsibilities. So if you are going for your A+ certification, which many of you are from our meetings that we had, this is probably one of the most important modules in that it has the troubleshooting process that CompTIA wants you to be able to know, obviously for knowledge, but be able to regurgitate on the test. And this will be a bunch of questions on the test specifically about the troubleshooting methodology. These questions also show up in almost every CompTIA certification that you take. So it's a good use of your time to learn the troubleshooting methodology. So in this first section, we're going to talk about a capacitor, electrostatic discharge, and a peripheral device. Have any of you ever walked on carpet and then shocked somebody? Yeah. Okay. What do you think that does to computers if you were to reach inside of a computer? It'll reset it, but it's going to hurt it, right? It's going to fry. You have the potential to fry components. So today is going to be mostly safety, creating a ticket, and then talking about the troubleshooting methodology, okay? So a capacitor is, think of it like a battery. It's going to store voltage till it gets to a certain point, and then it's going to discharge. So back in the day, do you guys remember those big CRT monitors that you saw? Like arcade cabinets had them, and you might still have some laying around, or you might have had. Those were cathode ray tubes, and inside of them, they had really big capacitors in them. So if you took them apart, they had potential to kill you. That's how much power was inside of them. Okay, so a capacitor is something that's going to store that voltage. Okay, now a telltale sign that it's a bad motherboard is if these capacitors, which are they're cylinders in shape, but if they're bubbled up at the top or they're split or anything's oozing from them, that's usually a good sign of a bad motherboard, okay? So if you see a capacitor, and I'll grab a motherboard out that has some blown capacitors on them just so you guys can see them. But capacitors hold voltage. They store that electric charge, okay? Electrostatic discharge is that shock when you are on carpet and then you touch stuff. That's that electrostatic discharge. And then a peripheral device is anything like a monitor or a printer, which we talked about last time. So capacitors are soldered in, and without going down the rabbit hole of electronics and how electronics work, certain things need a certain amount of energy in order to work. So think of it like a temporary storage tank, and then it discharges very quickly, usually. Whereas a battery is meant to give life to a device that is not plugged into the wall. Okay, or in the case of a desktop computer, you might see a watch battery on the motherboard. That's to keep things like time and settings, and if that goes dead, you just replace it. If a capacitor goes dead, you'd have to solder it back on, but if you're working on a motherboard, chances are it's just easier to replace the motherboard. Yeah?
Now, what you said was called a CMOS battery?
Yep, absolutely. So when it comes to safety, when it comes to working inside of a computer, we want to make sure we remove any jewelry, okay? If you've ever noticed at Geek Squad through Best Buy, they wear ties, right? So if you didn't know this, they are actually clip-on ties, and that is by design. So if they're working on something and it pulls, like a printer, for example, it's meant to pull the tie off because you don't want anything kind of dangling inside the computer. It's the same thing for jewelry. A little metal thing hanging down like a necklace or a bracelet where you reach into a computer, you're going to touch. You have the potential to touch 2 points, and it's going to short stuff out. So you want to make sure you remove any jewelry before you start working inside computers. It's really metallic jewelry, but it's best practice just to get in the habit of removing any, okay? So when you look at and if you live in an older house, you might not have the ground plug. My house was built before 1900, so ours don't all have that bottom plug. But what that is our grounding pin. So you want to make sure that that does get plugged in, that you don't just cut that off, because that is a security measure, okay? So when you plug it in, that's what it'll look like, where it has that little hole on the bottom. Again, basic stuff that you guys probably already know. So when it comes to work on a laptop, you want to make sure that you remove the battery if you can, okay? With newer laptops, someone flip over the laptop that you have in front of you. So it's an all-sealed case. There's not an easy way to remove that battery, right? So in that case, when you open it up, you'll have to be careful when you take that bottom shell off. But once you get it open, you'll be able to unhook that battery if you need to do any maintenance on that device, okay? Same thing for power supplies. Don't ever take a power supply apart, okay? Look at these little things that you see here, these little green things by the cable. Those are the capacitors that I was talking about. Okay, so those are holding a bunch of, I keep saying information because we're talking about data all morning, but holds a lot of voltage. So you want to stay away from those. But really, and even these big ones, these honking ones over here, if you see a power supply like this, like don't go near it. Like just get rid of it. This cover should not be removed from the actual power supply itself because it's not safe at all. Okay. So high voltage rule of thumb. So if you have like the CRT monitors or the anything that's like of high voltage printers too, when they warm up, especially laser printers, they have a lot of extra voltage on them. The key there is to not use a ESD wrist strap. So what does ESD stand for? Electrostatic discharge, yeah. So you want to make sure that you're wearing that wrist strap. And we'll get to a slide that shows kind of that wrist strap and how it works. Also, as a rule of thumb, I mean, just discharging yourself before you reach inside the case is also kind of a good best practice to have. So like I mentioned, printers. Obviously, I hope this should go without saying, don't stare into any laser lights, okay? Laser printers have laser lenses on them that will that are used to print things out. Don't stare at them. Also, toner is extremely toxic, and it's a powdery substance that can get into your lungs. Laser printers also get really hot because they are baking that toner into the actual paper itself. And then also any moving parts. So kind of stay away from fans inside of computers, but specifically to printers, you know, making sure like all those gears and sprockets that you're not getting anything hung up on there. You probably won't see dot matrix printers, but they have hot solenoids inside of them. DVD drives, again, probably won't see DVD drives very often because they're kind of becoming a thing of the past, but they have laser lights on them. Fiber also has a level of whether LED or laser that is coming through the actual fiber, so don't stare into bright lights. Physical hazards. A lot of times I've seen where technicians walk into a server closet and they just want to fix the issue, right? We just have that built into us that we want to solve the user's problems. And they don't take into consideration their own safety. And tripping over wire, especially if you're the only one working, you know, tripping over a wire and hitting your head on a network rack and then being unconscious and laying there does not sound like a fun time, right? And these are accidents that you're like, oh, that's so far-fetched. It has happened. It has the potential to happen. So make sure that you take a couple minutes just to clear and make a clear working area before you just jump into the actual problem, okay? Also, lifting hazards, don't be afraid to ask for help, especially when it comes to servers, okay? When you rack mount a server, servers are very heavy. And when you rack mount them, you're gonna want two people to do it because I've racked them myself and I ended up doing more damage, not serious damage, but more damage to the actual rack itself than if I would have just asked someone for help, okay? Because when you put a rack in the 4 posts, it's only being held on by your 2 screws in the front and 2 screws in the back. And if you're trying to like hold it up there or you let it rest on the gear below it, there's a chance that all that gear could fall because they are so heavy. So just if you know what's going to happen, don't be afraid to ask your boss, hey, can you help me with this? Or can you get someone to help me with this? Even if it's somebody that's not in an IT role, you literally just need them to help, you know, put it in there. It's not worth, you know, hurting yourself to do it. Same thing for unloading stuff. Use a cart. That's why we bought a cart like a year ago to move product or move different components and stuff around. Just be smart about it. You know, your health is something that is more important than any job, okay? And that was something that, you know, I myself when I was younger, I didn't take that into consideration. And now as I'm getting older, I can feel all of those things, you know? So again, there's no job that is worth your health at all. Fire suppression, there's different types of fire extinguishers based on the environment that you're in. And there's also different fire suppression based on where it's not just a fire extinguisher. Once you start working in data centers, chances are they're going to seal and they're going to suck all the oxygen out of that room. So you have to be cognizant of the rooms that you're working in because if that's triggered, there's a potential for you to be stuck in there while it's sucking out all the oxygen, okay? And what did we learn yesterday? Our body needs air. Air needs to go in and out in order to survive, right? So make sure that you're cognizant of those areas that you're working in. Cool. Okay, I'm trying to move through this because I want to get it all in. We're already 10 minutes in. Okay, electrostatic discharge. So it's where molecules that would normally be apart come together, and your body acts as kind of that capacitor, and then you'll discharge. So they're going to come together, and then you'll actually discharge that onto your components. So it's just like touching both sides. Anybody ever, I don't suggest this, but has anybody ever taken a 9-volt battery and did the lick test to see if it's still a good battery? Okay, so you're touching the positive and the negative together in order to see if there's still power in there. Same thing if you've ever jumped a car and you touch the clips together, you see a spark. That's making that connection, and that's what's making that spark. It's the same thing for computers. So how much voltage does it take in order to discharge or to ruin things? So the smallest is 3.3 volts, okay? So these are what our computers normally run on. It's 12 volts, 5 volts, and 3.3 volts. So you, as someone walking and walking on carpet, you have the potential to put out 3,000 volts for electronic discharge, okay? So as soon as you touch these components, that's why you're going to fry them, okay? Because they're used to working at 12 volts, 5 volts, and 3.3. It's just like if you were used to being in an environment where it's like 68, 70, and then you're thrown into Death Valley in the middle of summer where it's super, super hot. Like you're gonna fry. You're not used to it. You're just not gonna be able to work in those conditions. So it's best that you discharge yourself by touching the case of the computer. Best case scenario is actually having a static mat that you stand on and work from. If you go and work at a help desk, like Geek Squad, Best Buy, or like Armordyne in town, chances are this is all already set up. The bench has these mats in place. When I was at Best Buy, they actually had little circles all along it that you could hook up your wrist strap to when you are working on the computer. Okay, so the static floor mat, anti-static floor mat, and the static mat is what you should be working on. Okay, and even if you do go over a rug, just stepping on that mat will discharge yourself as well. Okay. When it comes to actually handling components, we don't want to touch the part where it gets inserted into the motherboard, okay? So on RAM, it's those little gold pieces on the bottom. Same thing when it comes to things like sound cards or network cards. You want to stay away from those gold pieces, okay? Because that's where the green, if you look, there's not really components like right here. There's that green board. So touching that, not necessarily going to hurt it, whereas the gold is directly connected to the device. And now static charge does jump, okay? So if you've ever like rubbed your feet and then got close to somebody, you'll actually see it, especially if it's dark, where you'll actually see that arc kind of jump over. So just because you are only handling it here, if you're close to this, you could potentially hurt it. It is best to hold or put your components in static bags. So if you ever buy components, chances are they're going to come in static bags. I hold on to them. There's a bunch of them back in that cabinet. So if you are working on your own PC here and you're taking parts out, I can give you some of those static bags so that way you don't ruin your components, okay? Plastic and styrofoam also have the potential to generate static. A lot of times in work environments, they get the cheap styrofoam cups like for the break room. Just, again, if you discharge yourself, you don't have anything to worry about, okay? Static mat that we talked about earlier, this is what they look like. You can see that little button there. It's just like a snap button that you'd see like, I'm trying to think if you've ever like on a tonneau cover on a truck, any like industrial snaps, that's what that is. Okay, so this is connected to you, and then it's taking any of your stored up electricity and grounding it out to that static mat. Okay, so you can see here in this case, it's this static mat specifically isn't touching you; it's actually touching the case, and then you can attach it to the static wrist strap as well. So this is in the best case scenario. If they're asking you questions on a test, this is what you do. Actual work environment, this is a nice to have, but not an always have. So that's where just discharging yourself on the side of the case is best. And if you're working on a PC, like let's say a teacher's room and there is carpet, just removing that PC out of that room to where it's like a hard floor like we have in here, that's also going to help. So you don't, as you're working there, you're not creating more ESD potential for ESD. Okay, good job. Cool. Okay, so moving on to environmental control. So this is where we're going to learn about a UPS. So UPS stands for an uninterruptible power supply. Okay, let's break that down. What does uninterruptible mean? Doesn't stop. Power. Supply. It's like a battery, right? So with a UPS, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that are in the actual rack there at the bottom. So they're kind of twofold. If we lose power, yes, it's going to give us battery power, but it also gives us clean power. Remember how we talked about our components wanting that 12 volt 3.35? The power that we get off of the grid is not always acting in a perfect wave. Okay, sometimes, and we'll learn about like brownouts and stuff like that, sometimes we're not getting all the way to that top of that arc, and sometimes we're going way below what we need to. What our UPSs do is they act as what's called a line conditioner. So a line conditioner will make sure that we get that good, what's called a sinusoidal wave as it's going into our devices. This makes the most difference for servers, but it doesn't hurt to have a smaller one at your PC at home if you lose power, because just having it have that brownout is actually worse than having a total shutdown, okay? If you have a computer that's constantly in a brownout state, it's constantly working harder and you're going to ruin your components. You're putting too much stress on those components, okay? A standby power supply is something more like here at the school, we have a big generator out back. So if we lose power, that'll instantly kick on, and you might notice the lights flicker, you might not, because what's happening is the power's coming in, and then we have like a small little bit of backup just to get us to cut over. Cut over, that word means from going from one thing to another. Okay, so if we're going from, let's say, Armstrong Internet to HughesNet, which I hope not, but when you actually make that switch over, you have a little bit of downtime and then it cuts over to the new one. So that's what that word cut over means. We're going from one system to another system, whether that's internet or power, okay? Battery, alkaline, make sure that we are disposing of them properly. I keep going to Best Buy because that's probably the closest, more the localist that you can go to. They have a place where you can properly dispose of your batteries. You don't want to just throw them in the trash. You want to get them to a proper disposal site. Same thing when it comes to lithium ion. I don't know if you guys were around for the Samsung Note debacle with the batteries, where they were like blowing up, and that's why they weren't allowed to, go on planes because they caused a fire hazard. That's because of the type of battery, and if it gets punctured, it'll cause a fire. So that's why we don't just want them to be in landfills, because they'll start fires. Okay, and also it's just not good to have something that doesn't really degrade very well in our landfills. Okay, print cartridges, same thing. Make sure they get to the right place. There are places that refill cartridges. You don't really see them as much anymore. Printing has gone down over the years as far as the necessity to print. How many of you guys have home printers, like printers at home? So like 5. Okay. So that shows that, those stores that were dedicated, we literally had ink cartridge, like stores dedicated to ink cartridges and refilling ink cartridges. A, because it was so expensive, so there was a place in the market for that. But B, everybody was printing at home. Now everything is digital, signatures are digital, so there's less need to actually print anything out, okay? Monitors, same thing. We talked about these big CRT monitors, right? So with these monitors, you don't want them in a landfill, also because they have a ton of power in them, so it could injure someone, okay? Also, the glass that's in there could cut them. See you later, guys. Could cause harm to people and injure them as well. As far as like how does it work when you work, maybe not your personal electronics, but once you get into like industry, is recycling. So here we recycle at least once a year. Same thing at my other job at ACA. We usually do it at the same time, and they come pick up all your recyclable stuff for free. Okay, because what they're looking for is they're looking to get the other precious metals out of computers like gold and stuff like that. But that's a free service where they'll come and pick up all your stuff and get all the asset tags off of it and give you a certificate of clean recycling. So you can give that to your board or your owners, whoever, to keep you guys out of trouble, right? So that way you're not just throwing stuff in dumpsters. Okay. Yep, look at that. use recycle companies. Temperature. So do computers like heat? No, not at all. So we want to keep them cool at all times. A good operating temperature, like I said, is around that 65 to 70 degrees. They're a lot like humans. You know, they like to be in a comfortable environment. This is also why when I joined the military, I went into IT because I have to stay with the computers. So if I get deployed to like a very sandy desert area, be like, hey, servers don't like to be in the sand and the heat. I need some AC. And it keeps me nice and cool. Humidity, same thing. High humidity equals condensation, which means moisture. Do computers like moisture and water? Absolutely not. So we want to keep it at that 40 to 60%. There are much lower cost monitoring systems now. Back in the day, they were very expensive. Now you can kind of homebrew your own things with Raspberry Pis in order to make sure that it stays there and gives you a alert if the temperature or the humidity does go higher than it needs to be, okay? Another easy way to make sure your computer is not overheating is to make sure it's clean, right? So getting all the dust and debris out of the computer will be huge. When you are cleaning out fans, make sure that you are holding on to the fan. Obviously, make sure it's powered off. But then when you're cleaning it out with compressed air, make sure you hold the fan and blow all the dust out. Why do you think we need to do that? Why do you think we need to hold on to the fan? Yeah?
So it doesn't spin and hurt us.
Okay, so it doesn't spin and hurt. Yep, absolutely. What else? Yep, so it doesn't spread the dust. Sure. What else? What is inside? Any skateboarders in here? So what is inside of those fans? Bearings. And do bearings stay as good as they are the first day that you use them? No, they wear out over time, right? So inside there are bearings that could wear out, and that'll lead to weird sounds or potentially the fan from not working, okay? You can use a vacuum, but what do we know about vacuums? Static, right. So you have to make sure that you have, the most common one is a data vac, and it's a static-free vacuum system to make sure that that doesn't hurt the components. But honestly, out of my 15 years of experience, I always have just used either an air compressor or compressed air to clean dust and debris off, okay? They say damp cloth if needed. I would definitely keep that to the exterior of the PC, okay? If you can't wipe it down or if it's not coming up with just wiping it down with a dry like cloth or something, just use a damp cloth to get that dust off of there, okay? Look at that, we're already on slide 66. We're more than a third of the way done. 190 divided by 3, yeah. Power concerns, we already talked about this, right? This is what a normal level looks like is here on the bottom. A surge is when it goes higher than that top, hill of that roller coaster, right? That's going to be a surge. Now, if it's doing that over and over again, that's where we're going to get into our brownout, okay? So with brownouts, brownouts are where it's going, you're going to see that same peak, but it's going to go down below, or you're going to see this normal level be shrunk, okay? So it might not necessarily surge and plummet, it just might be shorter than that normal level, okay? So I wish my pen worked, but it would be similar to this, but it's just going to kind of stay below, and it's not going to hit the lowest lows and the highest highs, okay? When we're looking at, once we get into networking a little bit more, what do computers understand at the end of the day? They only know one thing, right? Yep. Binary, zeros and ones, okay? So this is a 0, this is a 1, this is a 0, this is a 1. So anytime that we're not getting those perfect waves coming through, we're going to have some type of corruption, okay? So a lot of these things that you learn about computers will transfer as you learn more and more stuff, and it'll kind of have those aha moments for you guys, okay? So brownouts we talked about, blackouts, just no power at all. Transformer failures, someone hits a power line, stuff like that. So surge protectors, do surge protectors have batteries? No, if they did, they would be UPSs, right? So surge protectors just help us from those spikes, okay? So they have some technology built in to kind of normalize that and condition the power, okay? It is a power conditioner. It's going to detect that surge, and it's going to then click the button so it'll save your device. Notice what it does not protect from. Sags and brownouts, okay? A sag is when it goes too low. A spike is too high, a sag is too low. And also a brownout where it's just constantly not getting enough voltage. That's where the UPS comes in, where it'll actually condition our line for us, okay? Boom, look at that, we're already slide ahead. PC protection, make sure you protect everything. Again, this is nice to have, not a have to have. On your servers, you have to have it, okay? Whether that's a rack mountable UPS or one that just sits by the rack. Your end user devices probably are not gonna have a UPS. It's just not in the budget ever. People aren't that forward thinking, especially now that we're a lot more cloud-based. It's hard to argue that a end user's machine is something that we have to keep up at all times. Even in the industry where, you know, we're moving towards laptops, so it's kind of like a built-in UPS, right? Because it has the battery built into it. So even if they do lose power, it's not going to cause any issues for them. Also, your networking equipment. So we could actually lose power here, but still keep our internet connection up by using uninterruptible power supplies, okay? And that confuses a lot of people. Like, the power's off, how do we still have internet? It's because these access points are powered by the switches. It's called PoE, or Power over Ethernet. And when we have UPSs, they still maintain that power. So we can still have phone calls and stuff like that. Also, POTS, or plain old telephone system. Does anybody still have a home phone? One person, two people, a couple people still have a home phone. If you do lose power, chances are those are still going to stay up as well because they're not really powered off of the grid. Now, if they are wireless, like you have a cordless phone, then that might not have power, but a plain that you plug into the wall, you'll still be able to make a phone call. Types of UPS. So this is going to be online versus bridge. You won't have to know that as much. So this is what you're going to see in the stores. This is what it'll look like. APC is probably one of the front runners when it comes to UPSs. There are a couple other ones out there, but APC is kind of a tried and true. It is made by Schneider Electric, which is high-end, like, electrical components. When it comes to planning, like how big of a UPS you need, you always plan for about half the power, because do we want our actually, let's talk as a group. So if I have everything plugged into a UPS and the battery power is a finite resource, are we going to have more time or less time than if we were to only plug in half of our devices? We're going to have less time, right, if we're plugging everything in. So we need to kind of see how long do we need to keep a system up based on historical data, like how often does the power go down? It's called risk assessment. So how long is the power down and how often does it occur? And then that's how we would kind of make our assumptions, okay? So the less stuff you put on there, the more runtime that you're going to have. So that's why each of those servers, it's one server per one UPS. Number one, it's so you guys can configure them and like set up the alerting. Like if we lose power, you can have it so it sends you a text message, but also to get the most amount of runtime as well. For UPSs, plug them in, make sure they're charged, and then plug your devices in. And then this has burnt so many people, not physically, just as far as like having systems go down. What do you notice about the top that's different from the bottom? What's up? Oh yeah, it's upside down, but what else? Yeah, so it says battery backup here, right? This is just surge protection. This is battery backup plus surge protection, okay? I've seen where people have plugged in their servers and stuff into these other things, and then it goes down and they don't know why. So then you'd be like, well, why would you even use this? Well, things like monitors or other things that might be in the closet, like the fans for the actual rack itself. Like, is it important that you have those fans to stay cool? Yes, but you need enough time to safely shut down those servers. That's what our end goal is, right? If we don't think the power is going to be up, then we need to be able to get in there and shut them down to make sure that we don't have any data loss, okay? Automatic shutdown, yep, you can have the UPS automatically kill your devices and safely shut them down, okay? So there will be a practice lab in LabSim where you install a UPS and set that up. And we talked about the best way to dispose of print cartridges. Cool. So let's go ahead and pause there. So continuing on, into professionalism. Professionalism is not playing ping pong when you're not supposed to.
You don't say we weren't allowed. To be fair, we didn't know.
I know. I really don't. It's not me. I don't really.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah. It's not me, it's you. Okay, so how to make a good impression for even like your interviews when you first are getting a job in IT or really any job, that is be early, okay? So it's funny, and again, I go back to like my military experience. You'll have your top level person, and then your next person is going to be 15 minutes early, and then the next person is going to be 15 minutes early. And next thing you know, for a show that's like at 5 o'clock, you're lining up at 3 a.m. to march over and listen to the Army choir. Yes, this actually happened to me. And then we sat there in formation for like an hour and a half before they started. Okay, so you can be too early for your job. Okay, but like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, that's a good place to be. Okay, last week with like the flooding and stuff. Even when I was bringing Hayden here, I was like starting to get a little nervous, not because I was going to be late for work, but I was going to be late to being early. And that's just not a good way for me to start my day. I like to come in, have plenty of time if anything pops up. And like yesterday, what happened first thing when I got here? Hey, by the way, we're here to train every single student in the building. Oh, you didn't get the text or you didn't understand the text? Well, we're still here. So now my 15, 20 minutes that I had is now spent to make sure that all of this training goes on for you guys. So those things will just randomly pop up, especially out here with like Amish buggies, school buses, stuff like that. So just plan to be a little bit early. This next one, we talked about this earlier in the year, right? Being culturally sensitive, just because, and it's tough, especially when you guys are younger because you've grown up in the same area, many of you, and you don't know how other people were raised. So making sure that you are culturally sensitive to that. In a work environment, none of that insensitivity has a place and you'll get fired. Being fired is actually best case scenario. Worst case scenario is they, I was gonna say, are getting canceled, and then lawsuits could ensue, and you kind of black mark your name, and it's harder for you to get a job. Use proper language when you're in school, in a school, like if you're working in a school. If you are working in a college, university, law office, doctor's office, any of those, using proper language is key. Especially if you are working around people that are of a higher, I guess, stature, because they hear those, slang words and stuff like that, and it's an automatic turnoff. Okay, so if you're using those casually, with your friends, it doesn't really have a place in the work environment. Following the dress code, respect privacy, and avoid distractions. Okay, those are all things that are just kind of the go-to. I feel like these have probably been told to you over and over and over again, but they are super important when you start working. So when we're talking about servicing computers, we want to make sure that we have the proper authorization for repairs. Okay, there's this thing called liability. Who knows what liability means? You've answered a bunch. Over here, right there. Yep. There you go. What you're responsible for, right? So if a customer brings a laptop in and I just start working on it, and I lose all their data and I didn't get, authorization to repair that laptop or to do anything with the hard drive, then I am liable for that. So now it's on my dime to get all of those, pictures, music, movies, whatever it was on that hard drive. I'm gonna have to send that to data recovery and incur that cost in my business, okay? So it's always important to make sure that, and especially if you're gonna start doing side work, to make sure that you even just have ChatGPT, put some type of liability contract out there, because right now you guys probably can't afford to have a lawyer, but if you do want to start this, at least have something that relieves you of any liability, okay? What's that? Well, service and implementation, blah, 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 invoice. So one of the hardest things for business owners to do is get paid. So like I just now wrote an invoice yesterday when I should have wrote it to be due on the 15th of September. But I get too caught up in like doing the work that I forget about that stuff. So making sure that you invoice for repairs, making sure that you have a good system in place for that, okay? So taking time to step back and working on your system for repair or for billing or for whatever it is will pay back in dividends, okay, for when you're doing this type of work. So in difficult scenarios, number one, acknowledge that you're there, okay? Acknowledge that, okay, we are in this situation. But then clarify, like, okay, I get it, your computer died and it's not working, okay? Clarify what is not working with your computer. Okay, it's not booting up, okay? Have a positive, okay, we're gonna get through this. Tell me again. I want to make sure that I know exactly what your issue is and actually listen to them, make eye contact with them. Body language is how we communicate, right? That's why during COVID for online classes it was so difficult, right? Because you didn't have that body language. You weren't able to talk to one another. You lost that. So making sure that you're keen on that people are, actually engaging with you and you're engaging with them. I'm pretty sure it's been proven to not be true, but crossing your arms, what has that been told? Like, what have you heard about crossing your arms when someone's talking to you? You look unfriendly. You look like you're blocking people out. Some more recent research shows that that's not as much the case because people, like, if they're more introverted, they're thinking, they're processing that information. So it's not necessarily a turnoff, but talking to them, like, hey, I noticed your arms were crossed. I just want to make sure, are you thinking about it? Or are you like shut off to this? Or I want to make sure that I'm communicating with you in a way that works for you. Make sure that you follow up. Okay. I missed an email, which I didn't really miss it. Somebody else was taking care of it, but I noticed it in my inbox today when I was looking for something else. I followed up with that individual and said, hey, I apologize. We switched to a new system here at the Career Center. This was back like August 15th, right? We had the meeting. The special ed instructor or director was the one that scheduled it. So it wasn't necessarily like on me, but I still followed up. Same thing today with a parent. I followed up with them. Hey, just making sure that we're on the same page. So just following up with your users will buy you credibility and it'll buy you time, okay? Because there's going to be a point where you're going to have a massive outage, and that's where you can kind of cash in some of that goodwill that you've had. So today at ACA, none of our Chromebooks could connect. None of the student Chromebooks could connect. We stayed calm through it. I talked to the lady who was on site, their special ed director. I talked her through some stuff, and all that goodwill of me following up in the past and responding within minutes, it wasn't like a freak out moment for them, right? They knew that I had their back. Even though I couldn't physically be there, I could do as much as I can remotely and then go by after class, okay, after school today. And don't judge someone for being not understanding computers. For example, my wife is not like a computer person. She does okay, but I don't hold that against her when she, isn't able to do simple things, because last time I checked, I don't know how to do surgery. I've never cut off someone's leg, okay? Those are all things that she's done, and she is, that's her area of expertise, not technology, okay? We're going to keep working on. All right, so making sure that we have a good impression, and we talked a little bit about handling difficult scenarios. Just really it comes down to putting yourself in their shoes, right, and what they're dealing with. Just small things or small changes in their workflow can set them off, okay? Cool. Change management. So what is change management? Let's break those words down. We're going to do this a lot in IT for confusing stuff and just building our vocabulary. So change management. What does change mean? A difference, yep. Not like it used to be. And then management. You can't use the word in the definition. Oversee, right? Documenting, having a process in place. So what do you think change management is then?
Supplement a new leader.
Yeah?
Learning to understand change.
Learning to understand change, or making sure that you are documenting, you have a process in place for when things do change. So sometimes you'll see a change order form. So here's an example of one. This is going to be more for large projects, or if you go and work in for the Indians or the Cavs or Cleveland Clinic, any of those super large organizations, you'll probably have a change order form or a change request form. Or if you're doing a big project and something on the project changes, that's when you'll have this form, okay? Because this could trigger having to purchase more items or less items, so you're going to have to get approval from the right people. Now, if you are on the service provider end, so let's say this is for one of your clients and something is going to cause, or you're going to have to charge more money, then this is where, for ACA, let's say I was charging them $100 to do something and it's now going to cost $150, I would have to have a change order form that's signed off by the customer, which at the end of the day is their board, okay? What are some of the things that could change? Well, the deliverables. So they didn't have an HP server in stock, so we have to get a Dell server. Completion date. like this is going to be longer because we can't get the parts in. Cost, hey, things cost more money, they take more time, or it requires more people to be on site. The phone call that I took while you guys were on break was I'm getting new windows installed at my house. They went to cut into one of the walls to put a new window in, and the house like started sinking. And apparently our house, the way it was built, is 1 2x4 from the first floor all the way to the top of the second floor. So when they cut it, it like started coming down. So it's gonna take more money, time, and resources because this guy's like, I don't know how to do it. There's a guy that knows how to do it. We're gonna get on the schedule for us to both come back so I can learn how to do it. Not that he's gonna learn on my house, but he can watch the other guy do whatever it is they need to do to make my house not fall down.
Is that practice on your house?
I hope not. Probably, but yeah, potentially.
He hasn't Where do you live?
He hasn't been there to see, but
Right.
sounds like it.
I mean, I could look. I guess I could look at our cameras, but I just haven't really had time.
No,
I'm pretty sure we signed that whole liability away. Yeah. They are not very happy. So personnel, again, we might need a different type of person to come in. And in systems, you know, obviously there's going to be some downtime in that there's now a big hole in my wall, or there is, you know, a conflict there. So when it comes to risk analysis, this is something that you're going to do a lot of in cybersecurity. I would argue maybe even more than in IT. And that's where we look at different things that we do and we see what could go wrong, basically, okay? How can we avoid this? Do we just want to accept this risk that it's going to happen? Does it make sense for us to put this, this risk on someone else, okay? So Chromebooks, for example, we have 2 options to give you guys Chromebooks if we do some risk analysis. What are some things that could go wrong with students having Chromebooks? What's that? They could look at bad stuff, okay. What's that? Abusing a privilege, yeah. What else? You could break it, right? Break a screen, right? So I'm pretty sure the first couple years that they did the one-to-one here, they carried insurance. So they did risk analysis and said, there's a potential that students are going to break these devices, so they can either accept that risk, which means they would pay for repairs, which is what we do now, or we could take that risk and put it on someone else. Who owns that risk if we have insurance? The insurance company does, right? So it's the same thing anytime you have health insurance, car insurance, any type of insurance. You're just taking that risk and you're avoiding it and you're putting it on to someone else, okay? So, so what else can you do with risk? What are some other things? So for cybersecurity, we're developing a new system. Now we can make passwords super, super long and super complicated, but what's then gonna happen for the users? What are we gonna see? They're gonna, no one's gonna know how to get in. They're gonna forget their passwords. Worst case scenario, they're gonna write them down on their desk, right? So we have to say, do we want to make a shorter password requirement in order to, what's the risk versus reward there? And we have to determine what the best place to go forward is, okay? So like our wireless password here, no idea what it is. I had to write it down. Our password for the instructor account, it was so confusing that I had to write it down. I manage so many passwords in my head, I just can't remember, as confusing it is. We should have done passphrases, that would have been a lot easier. And that could be, when we're looking at risk analysis, let's do the same password length requirement, but make it a passphrase, and let the users choose a passphrase. Like, my nephew is Hayden, #123. I mean, that's a super long password, right? And it has numbers, and it has the symbols, and it's gonna be hard to crack that password, but it's easier for me to remember, okay? Go through this. All right, so we're at the 45-minute mark, so we're gonna go ahead and stop it.